So Naomi asks, "What's your camera mic lighting setup?" Um, Good question. I have the camera that I have is the Sony ZV-1, and it's a great camera. It's specifically designed for like YouTubers, vloggers. Um, it's a great little camera, and you can run that into like a tool like CamLink, which is basically an HDMI card that helps you live stream from a little camera into your computer. And when you're working remotely, just like making it so people can actually see you in high fidelity really makes a difference in how you interact with people. And I have a ring light. It's a big, uh, I don't know, it's like this big that is right behind my camera over here. Um, and it's LED. I think you can get it for like $80 on B&H. If you look at B&H for ring light, comes with a tripod. It's not a significant investment. And it is nice because I get a lot of light coming in from my windows, especially in the morning. That's the east, and so the sun's coming up, and I just get like a bunch of light. This evens things out and makes it a lot better. And then I've got a fancy microphone because of my podcast, which if you were in here earlier, I was talking about my podcast Design Better. And this is an Electro Voice mic. You can get less expensive mics. I had a Rode podcaster before this. There's the Yeti, but having a decent mic is really helpful too, so people can hear you. If you're going to be remote 100% of the time, it's worth spending a few bucks to get a decent setup. I do have an inexpensive Logitech HD 1080p camera, and it just doesn't look all that great. And I think it was like a $40 camera. It's a tiny little lens compared to this Zeiss, big Zeiss lens on the Sony camera that I'm using. And just having a good mic is great. I think you can do a nice setup for less. Dan Mall, who spoke earlier today, has a blog post on setting this stuff up. At some point, I probably will write a blog post as well. But yeah, Mark Tila says, "I'm recording a video about audio and video for streaming right now." Yeah, it's good to have some decent equipment, and I think especially in a pandemic, we're learning a lot about how to do this remote thing better. I mean, I've been doing remote for 4.5 years, and it was when the pandemic hit, and speaking at conferences and recording some videos and so forth, I realized, kind of have to have a decent setup here. It's worth investing. Hope that answers your questions, Naomi. Also, while we're on this topic, you can get this is a little Lav Mic, Power to Wise. It's just a wired one, and so instead of having this giant boom hanging in front of your face, you can get one of these guys. I don't think this is terribly expensive, $20, $30, something like that. And so you can just plug in and have that. So, and it sounds great as well. I should also mention that my mic, again, I've over-engineered this because of my podcast, but it goes into a mixer, and it's called the brand is Focusrite, and it's Scarlett 2i2. It's a small mixer. You can find it on Amazon. If you look for Focusrite Scarlett, you'll find it. About $100 or something like that. So when you add all the stuff together, it's not inexpensive. But again, if you're remote 100% of the time, it might be worth it for you. I would spend the money on the camera, the light, and you could cut costs on a mic. You don't need a mic as sophisticated as what I'm working with here. By the way, if you have other questions about stuff like this or remote, as we wait for the session to begin, ask away. Yeah, so Mark says a good value for the money is the Shure SM7B as well. Gives you this new radio voice sound. Yeah, it's true. There are a lot of really good inexpensive ones that you can get your hands on. About $399, but you need a mixer for that as well. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you want to, spend less, the like those Yeti mics that are really popular, lots of people record podcasts with those. Um, I think you can get those for like $120, and you can get a little. They come with a little tripod. If you're using that for remote every day, you kind of want the microphone to be supported in a reliable way. So you can get these booms. Um, I don't know what they run. They can get pricey, but everything can. Yeah, so Jan says a good mic is definitely worth it. If you've seen Twitch stream with stuttering mic, yep, there really is nothing worse for remote communication. And Mark says, depending on what you prefer for your image in a stream, and if you don't like having a mic in your face, you can try a shotgun mic. True. Vitaly is using my Rode NTGS at the moment, which hangs NTG3, which hangs above him outside the picture. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, so you basically have it right up here, which is great. Again, I chose this mic because this is actually the type of mic that a lot of radio announcers use. Electro Voice is just so warm. They make such a nice product. I think this mic was probably around $400 too. So that's a guess. I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to show you another mic. So this one's very popular. Dan Mall has this one. Dan Mall's actually the one who kind of turned me on to like a good home setup or studio setup, and I think these are like $200 to $300. Rode Podcaster. It's a substantial mic. It's heavy. There's a lot of steel and magnets in here, and it's a very very nice mic. Liked it a lot. This is like going to the next level in terms of like voice quality and so forth. So, I mean, like anything, you can get super nerdy on this stuff. I am not super nerdy. I'm looking for, um, reliable, sounds good. Uh, Dan Mall points out that he feels like having this good setup, like a solid setup with a light and so forth, makes him feel more confident in calls. I find that too. I find that to be true of just like, looking your best and feeling like you're communicating clearly makes it easier to focus on the person on the other side. Mark says, I find that the USB version always sounded very thin for me. You definitely have to work on the EQ with the podcaster to achieve the sound that you have with your mic now. Yeah, and the mixer that I have here is super basic. I mean, I'm basically like have control of gain, but not like full dynamic range of sound. I actually don't know enough about that stuff to be able to use that. My co-host on the Design Better podcast, Eli Woolery, he does have like a mixing board where he can tweak things. Glad. Hey, Naomi, thank you for bringing up this topic because it's definitely a hot topic right now. I mean, it's been hard for people to even get webcams lately because of the pandemic. That everybody went remote, didn't have everything they needed, and so people started to cobble things together. I have some friends who have actually used like their Nikon digital SLR um, cameras and set those up with a streaming card to go in to their laptop to use those as their webcam, and it just looks amazing. I have one colleague who has like he's a filmmaker and he has his film camera just sitting around. And so we got an inexpensive, I can't really show it to you because it's off camera here, but it's basically like a streaming card that's like this big that your camera cable goes into and then directly into USB-C into your MacBook. So he's got like this film quality camera as his webcam, and it looks like it's so gauzy and beautiful, and like it looks like I'm talking to someone in a movie. It's incredible. And those of you who are with us, Vitaly's going to join us in just a few minutes. Main stage is wrapping up very soon. My friend Josh Clark is presenting, and he's such a great presenter. He's very funny, and he's a great storyteller. Yeah, Jan's asking like, could he hook up his GoPro? I think so. I bet you could, because I mean, GoPros stream. Um, with the digital SLR, some of them don't have that streaming capability. So um, I actually tried to set up. I have a Nikon D600 and tried to set that up, and it failed. Um, I think if I tried it again, I might be able to get it to work, but it wasn't working because of my streaming card. And there is the man,
Aarron,
Italy. How
it's
are
so
you?
wonderful to see you. It really is. It's like I'm just blossoming when I see it. It's wonderful. They always have this kind of beautiful backgrounds and everything. And it's just
Well,
the
look at
picture is
you.
great.
I mean, you've got this awesome like 80s dance party vibe going on behind you.
Yeah, so that's Mark's setup. He has all
I
kind of
love it.
buttons and lights, and I don't even know what else. It's like he's pressing his buttons. He likes buttons, I think. Just pressing
That's
buttons
amazing.
all over and then just changes. How are
That's
you,
amazing.
Aarron?
I'm doing great. You've entered a really interesting conversation. We're talking about how to set up your home studio with camera, microphone, just a professional setup, so you can be your best self as you are on Zoom calls, every day, all day.
I don't want to interrupt the conversation. I
No,
think
that's
this
good.
was like
We're just chatting in the sidebar here, so
okay, okay.
setting the stage for a deeper conversation here.
Excellent. And hello, Jan, as well. I haven't seen you today yet. Um, wonderful. Well, it's very interesting because when I wanted to have us to have this kind of session about remote work, obviously it's kind of obvious why we have this session in the first place. Um, but it's also personal because I felt like nothing would really change with us being kind of confined to our homes, just because I've been we like the entire Smashing team has been mostly distributed anyway for like 7 or 8 years now. We don't even have an office anymore
Yeah.
anyway. I thought
Oh,
like
great.
nothing. This is Mark. I thought like
Hey, Mark.
nothing would really change and it would be kind of the same.
Yeah.
But I also see that something has changed, and it feels like while in the past you kind of had this options that you could go and actually meet people, now you don't have that, and it really kind of forces you to be stuck and be productive in a place where you happen to be. You can't just choose a place. You have to be productive in a place where you're kind of stuck, whether you want it or not. So I'm wondering, for you personally, was it has much changed? Is it because I know that remote work has been kind of a topic for many, many years. And
Right.
at Envision, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, remote work is an option that's always
That's right.
there, right? So
Right.
has much changed for you? Like, how do you see this, this transition or this changing now?
So the pandemic did not change things for us in terms of remote work and collaboration and how we work together. We're an entirely distributed company, so there is no headquarters. So I've had calls with colleagues on boats, in the backs of minivans, on a drive to Florida. Um, you know, calls with colleagues who are digital nomads and moving around the world. So we're very accustomed to the remote life. And I think I should add additional context that it was totally new for me back in 2016 when I joined Envision. I had only worked on site with design teams. Not only that, I had the prejudice that remote work was not conducive to collaboration and creativity, productivity, and I quickly learned that that was not true. There is definitely a steep learning curve because you kind of have to know, like, where are my colleagues? Where are they in the world? What time is it for them? So you can schedule meetings and catch them at their best times and so forth. And there are a few bits, people always say, like, I miss those water cooler moments where I just ran into someone. I don't miss those. I found those to be, it's romanticized that that's where the best ideas come from. Great ideas come in meetings too. They come in one-on-one conversations, and that's not hard to facilitate in a remote environment. I found that a lot of those water cooler moments actually led to more interruption than brilliant ideas. There were, I can definitely track some brilliant ideas where we wanted a Webby for that app because of that conversation, getting coffee, but it's pretty rare. That's like one time in almost a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, remote hasn't changed a lot. I think it also helps, like, if you are remote and in a large city, so colleagues who are in San Francisco or New York, where space is at a premium,
Yes.
it's a lot harder, especially if you have family, kids, a lot of people you're sharing space with, roommates. That becomes challenging, just to manage that. I'm fortunate enough that, like, I can close the door and lock it. My kids do walk in upon occasion, like the BBC guy, where kids walk in and kind of interrupt a meeting. Had that happen a couple times today already, but yeah.
So maybe then let me dive in and just be a bit more curious about the culture, Envision, and how you actually just stay productive. So, for example, how do you deal with things like stand-ups, or do you have them, or do you find meetings very well? Do you have some restrictions on when meetings take place and how long they are? What's like your general overall process that works best for you or for your teams?
Yeah, so we do have stand-ups. And stand-ups follow a similar format of, like, what are your priorities this week, for example, like a Monday morning stand-up with my team. What are the blockers? And time boxed. We're all on Zoom. We use Zoom for everything, really. And then there's Slack, of course. The biggest challenge is just, like, too many meetings, which I hear from friends at Facebook and Google and, pretty much any company is like, it's so many meetings. I don't have time to do the work. I don't think that's a remote thing. I don't think that's an IRL thing. I think it's just a work thing. It's just, especially in a larger organization where you've got more people, and it's like people need to be informed and aligned on things. That becomes the big challenge.
Right. It's very interesting that you're saying that, because I think that in my personal experience, meetings remote are just slower somehow than like an in-person meeting. So you end up, or I at least end up, spending a bit more time in a conversation if it's online than it's in person. And so it feels like whenever and frankly, it's also more exhausting, much more exhausting to me. So once I have 2 or 3 Zoom calls, I'm done. I just, because you really have to focus then, and then you always end up with technical issues and all of that. And it's kind of really draining on my productivity, which is why, at least in my experience, I just started looking into ways of reduce or limit the meetings to a particular time frame, let's say. Well, sometimes it's not working, but sometimes it does. But anything else that you're doing that you see really helped the team to kind of embrace remote all these years?
Yeah. Well, a few things. One, I want to offer a metaphor, because what you're describing of, like, 2 or 3 Zoom meetings and you're just exhausted, I feel that too, but I feel it later. Like, if It's like the total number of minutes or hours of Zoom in a day is proportional to my energy drain. And I kind of think of it as like if you're a runner and you train and you run marathons, your heart and lungs kind of get accustomed to being able to run that distance. But if you run at altitude, at a high altitude, even if you're really conditioned, you just get less oxygen. And so your body, even if you're well trained in like being productive and, you know, being an effective collaborator, creative thinker, et cetera, in a remote environment, it's like that high altitude where it just requires a little extra energy. And it's like a little extra here, there. And then by the end of the day, like it adds up and I feel zapped. So Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And I have definitely felt it. But I think it's also like in IRL situations in real life, you know, where you're working together, I get meeting fatigue. I'm just like, I cannot talk about work anymore. I need to make a thing. And part of that is just who I am. You know, if we're introverts, it costs a lot to participate in those group conversations on a regular basis.
Right. Go ahead if you want to do it.
Yeah. And what was this, the second half of your question? Could you bring me back to that?
I have to think about that as well now. I think, yeah, do you have some sort of like best practices or things that really help to boost productivity in the team while everybody working remotely? In Envision, some things that really worked well or something that maybe didn't work well at all?
Well, a few things. And it goes back to meetings, like intentionally blocking off work time on your calendar is really key. I'm a big fan of not broadcasting what I'm doing on my calendar to everyone, because then people look at that and they use their own value system to decide how I should spend my time. So they try to book a meeting in my work block. And that's problematic because then you know, someone else just eats up my time. It's such a precious commodity, your own time, and someone spending, it's like someone grabbing your wallet and going shopping. That's just not, it's not right. It's not right. It's not fair. It's a violation of your space and boundaries. So blocking off the time and not sharing the details of your calendar. And then when you schedule meetings, like recurring meetings, set an end date. Usually recurring meetings just like they go forever. And then there's this reckoning of like, gosh, do I still need to be in this sync meeting with this person? Like it's good every couple of weeks, but we're still doing it. So if you have it end after 2 months, for example, then you can reevaluate and say like, is this still useful time spent? In which case you might reclaim that time. I've also taken to where I had meetings that were like an hour block. Could I get by with 30 minutes? Could I prototype that as a 15-minute meeting? And in doing so, people just like, we've got 15, let's cut to the point. I also like I noticed executives at Envision, they'll do like 18-minute meetings.
18,
it's like
very specific.
18 minutes. Like we have enough time to go deep on a subject, but not enough time to get lost in a rabbit hole. So let's cut to the chase and let's move on. And having those blocks, like where you can get up, like even if it's, you know, an extra 12 minutes to go get a cup of coffee, move your body, like step outside, go pick a tomato from your garden. That for me is, that's super helpful.
Right. Santiago is actually wondering about one thing that I also have in my questions list of questions. Do you recommend having text-based only stand-up meetings, or is it better to connect via video, audio every day?
I don't like to do video audio every day. I do, for my team, I just want to check in on Monday. Where are we? And then there's specific projects where I want to check in a little bit more frequently. And I keep a note file where I can say like, these are the top things. I also do something, I keep a Google Doc for every person that I meet with. And it's just a running agenda. And that is in the calendar invitation. So they can add something to the agenda and I can add something. So when we start the meeting, we know exactly what we're going to talk about and we can get going quickly. And then I have a full record. With some people, I have a record of like 2 years of conversation.
Wow.
And I can go back and see, like, on that particular day, we talked about this. And that has come in handy because there are a few times where we have a different view of the world. And I can go back and say, actually, we talked about it on February 27th. So I know that this was the shared expectation of what we were going to do.
Oh, that's really
It's
cool.
it's a very simple thing to do.
Yeah. But on the other hand, so we are working remotely anyway. So for us, I think that some things changed, but not that many. On the other hand, you find a lot of companies, especially organizations, that all of a sudden were kind of pushed towards remote, right? And I think that many, or at least some of the attendees of the conference will be in this position where all of a sudden there's just, no more office, at least for now, right?
Yeah.
So when you kind of have to jump all in remote, all of a sudden, how do you make this transition more or less smooth? What would you say are some of the really important principles or guidelines, I guess, that on the one hand, the company itself has to set, right, in order to ensure that people feel productive and don't feel isolated and all that. And on the other hand, employees have to set on their own to make sure that they feel productive within that space. What would you recommend? Like, what kind of guidelines would work best in this situation?
So first, because this is a deep question, if you go to designbetter.com, there's a book on remote work for design teams. So my team wrote a whole book on this topic when the pandemic came out. It's a free book. And there's some great advice in there. This is especially inspired by Greg Story's chapters. Abby Sinnott wrote a lot about this, and we talked to other companies to see how they were approaching this. When we're on the other side of the pandemic, I think you're right, Vitaly, that a lot of companies they won't re-up on their lease for their space, and teams will stay remote. What we found at Envision as we've grown, at least once or twice a year, sometimes it's more depending on teams, we need to get together and like see each other. So it's such a weird thing to like know somebody, but you don't know how tall they are. You actually don't know what they look like in physical space. So it's weird to really like know a person's voice and know the way they think and the way they work, and then meet them and be like shaking their hand for the first time. So we had something called IRL, and we had one planned for the end of February this year, and we pulled the plug 6 days before it. We were all flying to Orlando, Florida, and then the pandemic started to roll in. We were like, I don't feel good about this. Maybe this is being overly cautious. Turns out it was not cautious. It was prescient. So we didn't do that. But when we have had those, like the one that we had last year, super duper productive. To be able to sit down and connect with people, and also like really energizing, was fantastic. So what we did was have one whole company IRL, and then we would have team IRLs. So like quarterly business reviews, or a QBR, where leadership team might come together, or like a sprint, design sprint week, where we might have one team get together in a physical space and also have some team building and like go get some drinks and take a cooking class. We've done that as well. That stuff it's well worth it. And with the money that you save by not having a physical lease, and like buying people snacks and paying for their, commuting costs and stuff like that, it more than makes up for that. So like that IRL time becomes super precious and productive. There's like this, like if we were to graph IRL time, it's like its value is like this, and then the longer the exposure time, it starts to go down, because we need that retreat time to be able to like produce things and reflect and think, because work is not just about talking, it's also about doing. And so whether we're IRL or we're totally remote, there's that balance that has to be struck.
Right. I also find one thing particularly interesting is when you have some sort of a conflict going on, not necessarily conflict of, let's make border radius 11 pixels or 15, right?
Yeah.
But when you have kind of different teams having opposing ideas,
Yep.
and then this is where I feel we would just get together in a table with a board and talk through stuff, right? We will sort out. passive aggressive when you actually try a Zoom call, and so things start getting heated up. And I'm wondering if virtually, especially with teams like working remotely, because I was in this position once where we want to resolve it, but then you end up with this situation like, oh, everybody's in different time zone, so now we have to find a time slot that works for everyone. But because everything is a little bit heated up already, nobody really wants to accommodate too much, and so things just get bubbling up without a reason really. So how do you make sure that things do not explode, or things kind of stay productive and calm in teams, across time zones, across cultures, across everything,
Right.
especially in difficult times like this one right now?
Right. So I would also argue that it's a people problem, not a location problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we get far apart is um, our cadence of synchronization is off. So you got really far down with these assumptions down that one path, and your partner got really far down their path with a different set of assumptions over a long period of time, and those assumptions weren't checked. And then we get to a point where we're so far apart that it feels like, can we come to some amicable resolution? So that would go back to cadence of conversation. Can we have difficult conversations in a remote environment? Yes, I've had many, many a difficult conversation in a remote environment. I always, in those situations, um, I try to bring my humanity to the conversation and um, empathy, and think from my partner's perspective that they're coming to this work with good intent, and even though I may not agree with their approach, I know that they want what I want, which is to create something great or to come to a good resolution. So I have to keep that in mind to essentially keep my emotions in check and like emotionally regulate in that conversation. Um, I think that um, sometimes pre-conversation can be helpful to make sure you've got enough information ahead of time. And it might even be like if it's a group that has to talk about a hard subject. So maybe you, Vitaly, go talk to the head of that other team who, we need to get the teams together and get them realigned. You have a conversation behind the scenes like, hey, before we get everybody together, can we just maybe like get on the same page about a few things? So you two can come in with, that leadership that everybody needs to see like, okay, if these two leaders feel like, all right, we're not totally aligned, but we've got some things in common. We've got something to start with. That's how we build compromise
Right.
is by having some common ground.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
again, not a tools problem, not a location problem. It's a people problem. And when you find that, we need to make sure that everybody knows, especially decision makers, like we need to check in more frequently and make sure that we just have shared assumptions.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's just about kind of making the first step maybe a little bit more often than you used to in the past. So one thing that
Yeah.
we started doing is just checking in with people by saying, hey, how can I help you today? Right? That's pretty much it. So instead of just everybody just working on their own, very often
Yeah.
you will end up with situations like, children, errands to run, all those things where you
Yep.
kind of really need to be able to rely on somebody else, right? And so this is
Yep.
where it helps. A few really good questions in the chat here. Natasha is wondering how to get the participation of every member of the team. Oh, it's just jumped here. Sometimes it happens while working remotely in weekly meetings, for example, that just a few talk and the others are just listening. How do you make people kind of more engaged to participate?
Yeah. I'll give you a good tip, Natasha. And this isn't my tip. It's actually a tip that I learned from Jihad Afona over at VMware. He leads the design team there. So what he does ahead of a meeting is he circulates an agenda. So here's the agenda of what we're going to talk about, sends that to everyone, leaders and individual contributors alike, and asks them to comment, ask questions, add additional agenda items to that ahead of time. So if someone is an introvert and they're not likely to speak up in a meeting, they feel a little nervous around someone who might have higher rank in the organization. Or in the case of, you know, it's not uncommon to find teams that are not balanced in terms of like gender, like one woman in the team and there's like 10 men, or one person of color in a team. If you're the only in the room, you're a lot less likely to speak up, because when you speak up, it's not just about what you're saying and your idea, it's also about who you are and your identity. And there's a lot of headwinds to participating in that conversation. It's like, how do I justify my existence while also putting forward my idea? And so by what Jihad does is by having that agenda ahead of time, and people add their comments when they have clarity and they're not thinking about all of those external forces, they can, present their idea. And then whoever's leading that meeting, who's sent forth that agenda, there's, people who are the noisy folks in the room, speaking more than someone else, can say, thank you for that information, Tom, but I want to hear from, this person over here who asked this question. And so you can more effectively direct and engage everyone in the conversation to make sure that all voices are heard. And sometimes, like, if people aren't commenting, if they're quiet, just, saying like, I'd love to hear what you're thinking, or your perspective on this.
Right. So Oti is saying that this could put the person on the spot, an introvert, so that might be difficult. But I guess
it can be. It can be, but I think that if you just use a little bit of tact as the leader, saying like, I really enjoyed what
what the person
Robbie had to say about this. So you can like build that person up and make it a little bit easier for them to participate.
Yeah. One thing that I also want to bring up before I go to Santiago's question, actually, is another question that a good friend of mine, has been wondering about. Namely, when you're working in an in-person environment, you often get things like, gym, access to the gym, or you get all the little things that you kind of value.
Perks, yeah.
Maybe vacation days, right, which you can take freely and things like that. But when you're at home or when you're working remotely, essentially you're really kind of confined in your space. Vacation days, you cannot take vacation because there is nowhere to go. Gym, well, gym is locked, closed, you cannot go anywhere. So what can companies give to employees, I guess, to stimulate their creativity, to make sure that they feel comfortable and all those things?
I'll tell you, my favorite thing is Envision gives us all a subscription to Headspace. And I use it every day. I use it every morning. It's how I start my day. If you're not familiar with Headspace, it's meditation and mindfulness app, but it also has like exercise, kind of movement things that you can do at home. So that's a great perk, because I don't know what a subscription costs monthly, but it might be $15 a month or something. Also, Envision gives us a personal expense card. It's like $100 or so. And you can go to coffee shops. It's intended for a remote company to be able to go to a coffee shop and just like, I need a change of scenery. I got to get out of this place. But in a pandemic, you can't go to a coffee shop. So I just order beans online and make coffee at home. So that's a nice way to give a perk. There are some gym memberships where, there's online stuff that you can do. And whether your company's giving you a perk or not, I highly recommend just investing time in like movement and being physical, and like getting out of your house and going for a walk if you can do that. I actually, because I was traveling a lot for work and for speaking, I started doing what I called hotel room workouts, where I'd like travel with a small bag of resistance bands. These were sold out on Amazon for a while, like after the pandemic hit. But basically, when you have resistance bands, or like TRX is another thing, you can kind of like do a full range of exercise to keep your body healthy, just like going to a gym from inside your house, even if you have a small space. Like I've done this in a hotel room, just like body weight, and it's basically 4 different rubber bands. And there's also these like furniture mover things. It's like a felt ellipse that
Mm-hmm.
you can use to do like body weight movements that are super hard, like core movement things. So there's a lot that we can do during a pandemic being remote where we can be physical and keep our body engaged if we just,
Okay,
are thoughtful about it.
makes sense. Sure. Santiago is wondering, what would be the one must-have tool you would recommend that would be a huge benefit for a remote-first company?
A tool for a remote first company. Well, we were talking before we really started the session about how do I set up, a nice camera, a nice ring light, a nice microphone. And I think that in the not so distant future, as more people are online, working remotely, having a decent camera and a decent mic where we feel more connected, like I can see you better. It's not like I'm looking through some hazy smeared lens,
Mm,
like I can
mm.
see you very clearly, Vitaly. Like you've got a nice camera, clearly. Um,
Not me, it's Mark.
well, someone's got a nice camera here.
Yeah.
I think that that's a really essential tool. If I were building a kit, that people would ship out to everyone, like here's your MacBook Pro, here's your camera, microphone setup, and it doesn't have to be as fancy as this, but something that helps you feel more connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Let's see if there are any other. Josu is wondering, are you familiar with the concept of synchronous communication versus asynchronous communication?
I am
I
familiar with that.
guess.
Yes.
I think so. I think I am too, as well. If you want to specify the question, Joshua, we can actually go into it as well.
Yeah.
Maybe as the time is nearing the end, slowly. I mean, we could speak for hours for sure. I'm actually quite curious about how do you, if anything changed in terms of measuring the productivity of employees. So I see that some people really struggle. I see that some people find it very, very difficult to be productive and to work well. Um, so, and yes, we can of course kind of try to improve productivity by providing some tools and all those things. But still, it's time and it's situation which is just difficult for many people, just because again they have children, errands to run, for example, which makes it difficult to work. Um, so I'm just wondering if there are any new, I don't know, maybe KPIs or anything of the kind that need to be considered when it comes to measuring the productivity or the process somehow. Because if you have a deadline to hit, you have to get things out of the door. It has to be released.
Mm.
And as a manager, you need to ensure that people actually do good work in that amount of time. But then when you are in a slightly suboptimal situation, it's very difficult to plan, right? So how do you manage kind of this planning and estimates um, about when things have to be released with some predictability, the human nature and unpredictability that you just have with people who are in very suboptimal conditions when they're working on a product? Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I want to challenge the question because here's I want to share a conversation that I had with someone a while back. So um, I was talking to a COO of a very well known software brand who came from an IRL work situation where she was working like 10 and 12-hour days. COO at a large organization it's a heavy lift. It's a lot of work. And then she joined this well-known software company who has a very strong remote culture. And she realized that she could get done 12 hours of work in 6 hours if
Mm-hmm.
she had focus time and she could be uninterrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So when you speak about suboptimal work conditions exist and are rampant in IRL situations where there's constant interruption. There's no opportunity for deep thinking, for focus time. And when it comes to productivity, the biggest hit on productivity is task switching. And so when we have environments where people are constantly switching tasks, of like jumping to this meeting, a person just stopped by to ask for this thing, to check on this thing, we are always in a state of reset. We are never in a state of flow. And so the advantage and the opportunity in going remote is if we can contain our time, if we can be thoughtful about blocking off our time and about, having a space where you could lock the door and not have, your domestic life bleed into your work life. If you can set that boundary, you can actually accomplish way more in like 4 hours. You might not need an 8-hour day to get all the things done because you're just focused on that particular task. So I think in terms of like KPIs and like what are you getting done and what does productivity look like, it should be less about like measuring your productivity and more about
The
like
outcome of the work.
setting boundaries and guarding that time so you can set your employees and your team members up for success.
Makes sense. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, by the way, is turning off all notifications on my phone.
That's great.
Saved me so much time over all the like last couple of years. That was incredible. It really was.
Yeah. I got rid of my
But
Apple Watch for that, because I don't need to
okay,
be tapped on the arm for like 5,000 times a day.
yeah, makes
I have a
sense. Makes
mechanical
sense.
watch now.
Right. So, I love we can talk about mechanical. I am a big fan of mechanical watches.
Nice.
That's a different story.
Yeah.
So looking forward now, maybe just as a last question here, we are where we are right now. We see so many companies suddenly realizing that remote is cheaper, that remote can be very efficient, very productive, that you can actually save just a lot of money just by not having an office all of a sudden. And the best example for me, and it might be a little bit silly, but I think it was Greek government that was working on digitalization of the government services for a while. I think they had this project going on for 7 years or so. And when the pandemic hit in March, they were able to pull it off, setting up everything within 4 months, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it's quite obvious that they're not going to come back because now they've just accomplished it. And so many companies are probably in a similar position where they realize there are benefits, there are upsides of this. So do you think that in the nearest future, in the nearest new future, whatever future that would be, remote is going to be a default expectation? So when we'll see a job opening somewhere, most of the time we should be expecting it to be a remote friendly or kind of position that's also could be done remotely? Or do you think it's that many companies will still move back to offices and spaces?
So I do think that it's going to be a lot more popular. There are a lot of people who think like, oh, everyone's going to be remote from now on. I think it's probably, there are a lot of companies that invested a ton of money in like hiring an architect and designing a beautiful space and, trying to optimize a creative collaborative space. So I think that there are huge benefits in terms of saving on rent and all of the associated costs with that, like buying people snacks, and sometimes there's a chef and like serving meals and paying for parking and so forth. There's also it opens up access to a lot more talent if you don't have to get like only people in the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's some negative things that come with that too, that we might end up paying people less, not in a proportional way. So that's something I think we should watch. I actually think that it'll probably be about 30% will be remote. I think there will be a lot that will return back for various reasons. I think the pandemic is like, necessity is the mother of invention. There's lots of organizations trying to make healthcare online and try to make a lot of services work online. And then it's just like, well, we've got no choice, so we have to do it very quickly. It's compressed. But I think people will go back to like, okay, we made it. Now let's take a big breather, which might be a couple years or something like that. So it'll go back to a slower cadence once again. And I think that some companies, there will be a lot of companies who, right now, you can name on two hands maybe companies that are totally remote. It's like Basecamp, Automatic, Envision, Zapier. Like there's just not that many companies that are totally remote, and it felt so novel. And now it's going to be a really common thing. Like Google's going to stay remote through summer of next year, there's speculation that it'll go further still, and they might open that up. It's just total speculation. So, and having models like Twitter and Square, I think that a lot of talent is going to say, like, I can't afford to live in San Francisco. I can't afford to live in these expensive places. I'm going to go closer to my family, where my kids can have access to their grandparents, and that's going to it. The pandemic is helping people see what's really important in their life, and part of
Mhm.
what's really important is those social connections. And we feel that sadness and pain and loss every day from not having that. I feel that. And so I think people are moving. Some people are actually moving in the pandemic to, like, right now, to be closer to family because they've got young kids or they just got clarity on what they needed. So I think that there will be a lot more companies that are remote. And I think that there are companies that are going to be forced because, like, New York is a ghost town right now. We've got 70 some thousand apartments that are empty. So if you are running a New York company, it's going to take a while for people to come back. And there's probably a lot of people who won't come back. There are people moving out of the Bay Area, out of Silicon Valley. Um, so companies in these large places are probably going to feel the push to remain remote.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting thoughts, Aaron. Actually, on my end, I must say that I think that in many ways, many of the companies that I know, um, they learned how to work remotely now, and some of them don't really want to move back. So I think I totally agree with you at this point. We probably will see something like that happening where more and more companies realize the benefits of remote. If it's going to stay or not, to some way for sure it will be. And then we'll have another conversation about, edition 2021, how to survive remotely, maybe.
Yeah.
So Aaron, thank you so much for joining. Dear friends, thank you so much for
For having
joining
me.
as well. And it was really insightful and it was wonderful. I'm sure that you will stick around, Aaron. Maybe not today because we are almost ready and finished and stuff, but I'm sure we still have a couple of conversations that we will keep and we will keep running. I'm dying. I'm so sleepy at
Fantastic.
this point. Thank you so much, Aaron, for all your
Yeah. Thank
insights.
you.
I'm
Thanks
looking
everybody
forward
for
to the
coming.
next. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Oh,
See
by
ya.
the way, just before everyone leaves, we do have a Shop Talk show still happening in a session. So if you want to talk to other friends and get their cats and stuff, you can always head to sessions and join them.
That's cool.
Aaron, thank you so much for everything and
Thank
looking
you.
forward to the next time.
So good to see
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
My pleasure.